And I remember like just crying in my grandmother's, bedroom, just being like, why am I even here? And I remember thinking back, I'm like, wow, I was so young to be.
Welcome, everyone. I want to welcome to the show Heather Danielle. Heather, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you.
Awesome. On today's show, we are discussing the impact our childhood trauma has on our potential to manifest abundance and how it relates to our relationship with money. So, Heather, I just want to take you back and if you can share a little about your childhood and how it was like growing up for you.
Oh my gosh. First off, thank you so much for having this space to be able to share my story. And because so many people look at me now and they do think of me as like this quintessential, like successful person. And it's like, oh, but wait a second. I didn't come from the upbringings that of many people who are experiencing what I'm experiencing today, like all this amazing abundance in my life. I actually came from a very, very troubled and rough childhood. So I basically grew up not knowing who my father was, and that was okay with me. It wasn't okay that I didn't even have a picture of him because I really, really wanted that because I never knew if any stranger that was in a store was my father. And I actually was named after my father. My father's name is Lonnie, and I'm Lonnie. But then I guess that when I was 5 or 6 years old, they're like, hey, we're changing your name. You're Heather now. So I think that gave me some identity crises growing up. And then as I grew up, what was really strange was that my life just kept on getting worse and harder and harder and harder. By the time I was 5 to 6 years old, I remember not wanting to live anymore. And I remember like just crying in my grandmother's, bedroom, just being like, why am I even here? And I remember thinking back, I'm like, wow, I was so young to be, experiencing such depression and such sadness. But my life my life was so different than everybody else's that I knew because we often didn't have a home. We were always just going into a place, maybe it was a house, maybe it was apartment, maybe it was a trailer, just long enough to get evicted. So I never ever had any kind of friends. I never ever had any belongings either because what ended up happening was I would go to school and I would be having a fun time, whatever it is, and I would come home to no home because now all of a suddenly we're living back in a hotel room. We're living at my grandmother's house, and all of my stuff would be out thrown on the side of the house that I was living in. So we would literally like drive by the house and there's all of my toys, there's all of my clothes, there's everything. A few times my mom was able to get the landlord to negotiate a couple of days. But I still remember within those days pulling all of my toys out of the dumpster. So it's like, oh, there's my Barbie car, there's all these things, okay, this isn't useful anymore, my clothes and stuff like that. And then what would be really funny is that we would have to go school shopping, but unlike other people who went to the stores or even thrift stores, because my mom couldn't afford a thrift store, like who could afford those prices? We actually found out that there was a Salvation Army that would throw away their clothes that weren't selling in the dumpsters behind their store. And they would do this once or twice, every couple of months. And so that was a great day for my mom. And that's where we would go shopping. So my mom would go ahead and go into the dumpsters and she would grab all of the, basically the Salvation Army rejected clothes. And that is, kind of how we grew up, and that's how I was able to get my school clothes and things like that. And it's really funny growing up this way because like now I'm with my husband who grew up quintessentially the opposite way. And so if you see me smiling and laughing and telling my story this way, it's because I have since healed from a lot of this to where when I look back on my journey, I see it as, something that's interesting. It's very interesting. I didn't grow up quintessential. I didn't grow up with, how normal people have. So now I look back on that and I feel like, oh wow, that was kind of like an adventure. That was kind of a weird thing, as opposed to looking back and feeling sorry or feeling bad. I feel
That's really
like
interesting. Now,
that's
let
it.
me ask you this. Did your mom What was your mother's reaction? Did she make it fun for you, like we're going shopping in the dumpster? Or was she, what was her reaction like?
I learned to love my mom, but my mom was so toxic. She was so wrong in so many ways. So she didn't make it fun. The only thing that was fun was, she would come home with these garbage bags and she would just be like, okay, pick what you want, and that was fun. And I do respect that she tried her best. I had 7 brothers and sisters, so there was 7 of us for my mom to help. But my mom was very passive aggressive, very mentally abusive. She was definitely the person that would act happy to other people, but then behind closed doors, like she was never around. She got married several times. I mean, um, she got probably married about 9 times, and one of those times too, she actually got married to her husband in jail. And so it has been crazy times with that too, especially sometimes when he would get out of jail, like he did one time, and her boyfriend was over and so there was an altercation with a gun to where he pistol whipped him. There was blood everywhere. And the one thing that I did have growing up that a lot of people might be able to relate to is just one person. And my grandma was that person. So, like, for example, when a lot of the police would come over all the time for all different kinds of reasons, domestic violence issues, like the kind when my mom's boyfriend tried to kill my mom's husband who was let out on work release from jail or from prison. My grandma would scoop us up and take us away and save the day. My goal growing up with my brothers and sisters were not to get taken away by child protective services. That was our whole goal. And everybody knew in my house, like all of the kids and everything else, that don't say anything to anybody. Don't tell them what's going on here. Because if you tell them, they're going to take you away from me. And my brothers and sisters, we all wanted to stay together. So we're like, don't ever do this. I remember so many times, even when I was like 9 years old, wanting to run away, but then looking back and seeing my brothers and my sisters and being like, I can't leave them. And even when I got molested and I got raped in when I was a preteen going into my teenage years, and I had to live with these people inside of the house who have sexually abused me, I still couldn't leave. And I couldn't leave because of them. And so even I ended up moving out, thank God, when I was like 17 years old. And I remember the day that I moved out because I didn't want to go against any rules of the house because I was still a rule follower. And I remember my mom calling me up and she was like, hey, if you want to move out, you're 17, you can move out. I was gone within the hour. Like I had packed up a bag and I was out of there.
You were
But
ready for the change. You just needed the green light.
exactly, yes.
Did you
And
think it was like fear? Was it the fear that of consequence from your mom, that prevented you from moving out? Or was it fear that something was going to happen to your siblings?
I think by the time I got to be that old, it was a fear of repercussions from my mom and my stepfather, as opposed to fear for my siblings. Because by that time, we had moved out of state, and a lot of us were, so one of us was living at my grandma's house, one of us stayed up here in Michigan homeless. Like my mom let my brother, who was only like 11 years old, live by himself in a condemned house that we just moved from. Like it was crazy. And then my grandmother had custody of another one of my siblings. So by that time, we were kind of spread out. There was only a couple of us, and I felt like they were okay if I left. I just didn't want to have the repercussions of what my mom and my stepdad would do because their punishments were very, very harsh. And some weird punishments too. They tried to get me to marry one of my stepfather's friends because they wanted a computer. And
Wow.
they were so weird. And there was this incident with a neighbor. My grandma was living at this apartment complex, and she had this neighbor that had been our neighbor for about, I don't even know, 10 years, maybe 15 years. We would often, exchange Christmas presents with them. And oftentimes we would have to stay and live at my grandma's house for a little while, which wasn't a house, it was a really small apartment. And we would all just sleep on the floor. I didn't even have a bed until I was about 15 or 16 years old. But then we started hanging out with the neighbor more, and he ended up being a pedophile to the worst degree ever. And I tried to tell my parents, I tried to tell them something's wrong with him. He's making me do things like he's really, really wrong. And they were like, oh, it's all in your head. And you know what they would say? They would say, oh, Heather, he's doing fun things with you. He's taking you to places that we can't afford. So you should keep on doing that because he's able to buy you things. And I'm like, but who cares if he's buying me things? He's creeping me out. And so imagine my surprise when knock, 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 the detectives were showing up at my door, being like, Heather is one of the many children that this pedophile got his claws on. And I'm talking about when I went to the police station, this is the only thing that I still haven't healed from because he hurt so many children. I was at the police station trying to identify hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pictures of children and also maybe some teens, preteens. This was like in the 90s, and he had hidden cameras in his bathroom, in his shower. This was a major news story in Detroit, Metro Detroit. Everybody was talking about this. All my friends were talking about it at school, everywhere. And I hid my identity because I didn't want people to know that I was associated with him, because people made it seem like, oh, you shouldn't take showers at people's houses you don't know. And I'm like, I knew him for 10 to 15 years. He was a family friend. And actually I was the only person that he victimized, I guess, that was not a family member. And I was the only one apparently that really pushed forward to press charges against him. And he actually got 20 something years in prison, maybe a little bit longer, maybe 30. And can I tell you something really crazy about this? He was convicted, I believe, in like 1997. Fast forward to like 2022, okay? And I am living my life. I am fine. I am good to go. I am shopping at my Kroger's, my grocery store down the street, nowhere near where this happened, by the way. This was probably about maybe about 10 or 15 miles away. And I'm shopping at Kroger and I look up and there he is.
Wow.
And I remember I caught eyes with him, and now it's been years. I was like 13 years old when this happened, when he got convicted, and now I was almost 40 years old at this time. I recognized him, and here I'm getting chills right now. He recognized me. And immediately I look down and he turns away and starts like booking it. I get on the call with my sister and I'm like, oh my God, I see him. I see him. I see him. He's here. Like, this is insane. So I find out later that my family knew that he got out of prison because they informed them and was actually going to their church, but they didn't
Wow.
want to say anything to me. But I'm like, oh my gosh, like they should have told me, because that was extremely traumatic. Even though I've done a lot of healing around the situation and stuff,
Yeah,
nothing can prepare you from seeing that person in real life.
absolutely. And, it should have been on them. Like, they should have warned you that he was in the area, but you can't change people, right? You could only change yourself. You can't change your mother. You can't change, her husband, her boyfriend, your grandmother. You could only change you. And that's the thing we have no control over. But I always feel that sometimes that's for a reason. I'll tell you a little bit about an encounter. When I was 18 years old, I had to take a trip, and I took this trip, uh, and I was face to face with one of my predators. And again, I was just like you, was not really prepared for this. But I also realized that at that point, if I wanted to continue on living, I needed to let go and forgive. And I needed to forgive for myself. It was a way of me of just letting this go so I can continue on living. And I decided at that point to forgive this person. I didn't tell him, you know, verbally. It was just kind of in my mind. I'm like, I don't want anything really to do with the person. I don't have to have a relationship. Um, but I can forgive so I can live.
Oh my gosh. And then I'm just kind of curious too, because I think that this is something that so many people have a problem with. So I'm just kind of curious, if you don't mind me asking you a question, like
Sure.
how did that forgiveness look like to you? So did you like just write it down? Did you cry? Did you just instantly say, "Hey, I just forgive"? I'm just
I
kind of
was actually an emotional mess in that trip. Um, but it was mentally, I didn't write it down. It was more of a internal conversation that I had because I knew like this conversation, if I had a conversation with this person, it- you know, they wouldn't understand. They would never admit what they did was wrong.
curious.
And it was really just for me to really forgive myself for holding on to that pain for so long so I could move forward. Because when we hold that hurt and, and it's painful, I see it as you're still allowing that person to continue to hurt you.
Yes.
Because every time that memory comes up, you feel everything all over again.
Yes. And I want to bring that point up because I thought that I had healed. I thought that I was good. But then as soon as I saw him and I had that reaction, like that emotional reaction and almost like a scared reaction, like I wanted to hide or something along those lines, that's what made me feel like, oh my, okay, there's still some more healing that needs to take place here.
And I can tell you that, I saw this person a few, maybe two or three other times after that. And those encounters were like I was at peace. Like I was able to sit there, look at this person, have a conversation. And I kind of, every time I was just waiting to see, will this person will, say I'm sorry. But I didn't feel the hurt anymore. I wasn't in pain because I was able to release that when I forgave. And forgiving is not letting the other person off the hook. And that really needs to be understood. It's really forgiving yourself for holding on to that for so long. Because as long as you hold that in you, you allowing the energy of that person to continue to hurt you. So every time that memory comes up and you feel the pain, they're hurting you all over again. So by forgiving, it's like, okay, this happened. I acknowledge it. It's part of my memory. It's part of my journey, but I'm no longer holding on to that. I'm choosing to forgive myself and I'm disconnecting, cutting the cord. I'm not allowing this person to continue to hurt me any longer. And with that comes the strength of facing that individual and
Mm,
be able to even have, if it ever that comes to be, again, if you had another encounter, you'd be able to stand there. You'd have the strength to have a conversation without being hurt all over again. But it does take a lot of bravery. I had three different abusers. So one of them, it took me way longer to go through that process. It wasn't until a few years ago that I was able to go through that process of forgiveness. And that one took a lot longer because that was the one that was embedded in my memory because I was a little bit older. So I was
mm,
able to remember the details a little bit more than the ones that occurred when I was much younger. So that took a long time. And I think we all go through the process of, well, how about justice? Where does justice, come in?
mhm.
And through that healing process of that other person that took longer, I was able to realize that it's really not up to us. There's a God, whatever you want to call it.
Yes.
They have to face that. And I was able to understand that whole process because I always question. So, how about like my thing was, is that individual ever able to feel the amount of pain that I
Mhm.
feel from the consequences of their actions? And I was able to get my answer. I was able to understand the process that they have to go through.
Yep.
So that allowed me to heal.
I love that so much because I'm tracking the exact same thing as you. I feel like the exact same way as you do about that.
And it's a process, right? Not everybody can just heal overnight over, with these things. It is a process. It takes time and you have to
Mhm.
be ready. You have to be ready to let go. You have to be ready to forgive and you have to be ready to get to the next step. And everybody is different, but
Yes.
it's possible. The possibility is there.
And I love too that you brought it up to like everybody is different and things like that because I grew up and even I got through more physical abusive relationships. I've had a couple of stalkers that tried to kill me. So even when I was going into my young adult years and stuff like that, I was still just getting beat down on life. And one thing that I learned by working through a lot of this trauma and things like that, I was like, first off, I was like, where are the people who've also had this kind of trauma? Because I feel like I'm getting beat up over here. I feel like I could be on like Oprah for a freaking week. But one thing that I realized is, I look back on my past now and I'm almost like, I look back on it like, hey, I can get through anything now, number one. But also number two, too, trauma is subjective. So sometimes what other people are like, oh, I didn't go through as much as you, but you could still be equally, if not more affected by
Yeah.
what happened to you versus me. It's not a competition of who could take the most punches or who can, have the worst things happen to them. So I always say, like, honor it, no matter what you are feeling about a situation, like, it's okay that you're feeling that way. Because I remember I cried one time. I remember when I found out that that guy next door was who he says he was. And I remember I came in, I put my head on my grandmother's chair, and I cried for about 1 minute tops. And then my mom said something snotty, and I got out of it. And I didn't allow myself to cry about it for a very long time until all of a sudden I just broke loose about a year later. And then, of course, I thought that I healed it, and then I saw him. And that's one thing is like, you might feel a certain way about something, but feel almost like not justified in feeling the way that you do about it. But no, be justified. It is okay, like that you are feeling that way. Like each person is different with what they experience and how they experience it.
You're absolutely right. And I'm going to share a quick story because it's going to validate what you're just saying. Because the trauma is not really related to the physical actions that happens to us. It's the emotional impact. So that could be a small action that has a major emotional impact, or it could be multiple actions that we go through that has the same emotional impact. One example, and I saw this when I was a teenager, my best friend, who I thought had the perfect family dynamic, wonderful parents. I just saw them like, oh, that's like a wonderful family. They're so peaceful. They don't argue, like, they don't have the chaos that I had in my house. And one day I get a call that she had ran away from home. And when I got to her house and I'm trying to find out so I can go look for her, they had just found out dad had cheated on mom. And she just couldn't handle that. That was the first time she ever experienced something traumatic in her life. And for her, the emotional impact was so tremendous that she ran away from home. Now, to me, I'm like, well, that's just another story in my book. Like, that's a every other day occurrence. But I realized that, okay, my experiences and the level of trauma I'm experiencing may be equivalent to just this little incident my friend is going through right now. Because emotionally it's impacting her just about the same, even though to me it may seem like a little thing compared to everything else that I've experienced, but the emotional impact was just as tremendous.
Yes, that's exactly like I thank you for sharing that story too. And I love how exactly how you explained it, with the emotional impact that it had on you. Because going through a lot of my healing journey too, I realized that some of these big major things that happened to me weren't the most traumatic,
No,
and the honestly, the number one that is the most traumatic was when I was in first grade and I colored in the wrong lion. I colored in somebody else's lion, and I remember how scared I was of my teacher because she was sitting there screaming and yelling at me and just berating me. And I didn't care. I didn't care about the lion. Like he could have the colored lion, like because by me coloring it in, it helped him out, just a long story short. And that was so traumatic. I mean, like I still remember that. And that was actually causing a lot of PTSD in my life. And it was also causing subconscious behaviors I didn't even know. Because then that's where like my perfectionism grew and how bad I felt if I ever made a mistake and things like that. It all stems from that moment in first grade, not some of these other things. Some of those other things are bad and I still had to heal from them. But that one was one of the core memories that I had that had such a severe emotional impact on me that I had no idea was driving a lot of my life behind the scenes.
that's right. You're right. Now, going back to these experiences in your childhood, growing up pretty much homeless, and like how how was your relationship? Like how did you see going through your experiences and your mom's experiences? How what was your idea of manifesting as a child? And the relationship your mother had with money, your grandmother and everything else around you.
Oh my gosh, it was so funny because we never ever had money. And when we did, my mom would go out and blow it. And I remember being like little, being like, hey, we shouldn't do this. We shouldn't do this. And, like we shouldn't be spending this. We should save money because we're not going to have any food next week. I remember saying this at such a young age. And I learned from a very young age too that there was rich people and then there was us. Like you couldn't have that stuff. You couldn't do that. Anything on commercials, that kind of thing, that was them. You couldn't shop at these stores. That was for rich people. You are not them. You need to know your role. You need to know who you are. And basically, too, there was no such thing as manifesting. There was no things involved at all about how you could create your own life or you can make your own rules, that you should go beyond your comfort zone. There was none of that. It was actually the complete opposite. It was like life is going to live you, is you just got to get by. Like that's all you have to do. And it was so funny because as soon as I started breaking out of those conditionings that I've had when I was younger, that's when my life started to change because I was still homeless even in my young adult years. But this time I had a kid. I had my son when I was 19 years old. And the next thing I know, we're freaking homeless. Luckily, my church at the time allowed, my pastor actually spent the money to go ahead and put us up in a hotel for a week with my son. And I was trying to go to school. I was trying to do everything I could to earn more money to do all of this. And, now here I am like homeless again, going to school, trying to make ends meet. And what's really, really amazing is that my son grew with me through my basically my journey to finding out, yeah, manifesting is real. You can create this life. Your financial foundation, your belief or whatever it is can change and it can change very, very quickly. And now it's so amazing because now my son is 21 years old, and he can now see it for himself that I don't have to prove anything to him. The proof is in the pudding. So if you want to get to the good parts, I could tell you about that.
So yeah, well, what was the breaking point for you? Like what was the time in your life of your experience that you said, okay, I need to change that brought you on your healing path?
Well, first off, I think that what really triggered it was when my grandmother died because my grandmother was my everything. She was the only one that cared about me. She was my rock through everything. Even if she was never around, just knowing that she was on this planet somewhere just gave me such relief knowing that. And I ended up having what I believe is like a nervous breakdown where my body could not deal with this anymore. I was going through legal issues because this guy was trying to kill me. My grandmother died, all these things, and I started having seizures and I got very, very sick. And then within that, I ended up meeting somebody, and he's now my husband. But what was really funny was I really wanted to get out of working with kids. I was working at a child care center, and I really wanted to, maybe get out of working with them or working somewhere new. And there was this government job that was posted, but this government job was way outside of my norm. This was like double my salary. This was working for the government. Like, I'm not good enough for that. Like, I need to, like, just know my role, like kind of like almost like my mom talking in my ear, like, you're not good enough for that. And I remember he was my boyfriend at the time. He was like, hey, just apply for it. And I'm like, I can't. I was having like the biggest emotional breakdown just looking at the computer about to apply for this job. And I remember being like, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. And he said to me, he was like, isn't it up for them to decide? Can't you just take the interview? And if you're not good enough, they'll tell you. They just won't hire you. But can't you just press a button? I swear to gosh, I had been so scared of going outside of my comfort zone, doing something different, applying for a job that was way outside of my league because this could bring in financial abundance. This could be different. And so finally I just hit it and I applied for it and I rocked it. And I got the freaking job, even though like I was praying so hard that I would get it. And then that opportunity, and I can tell you about more, led to another opportunity of doubling that income. And it all started though with me breaking that cycle. That's breaking that cycle of what I told myself, feeling the unworthiness. And then what ended up happening was once I got that job, I got to go onto the military base. And so I would have to go straight every day to get to the child care center because it was a child care center job still, but it was with the government. And oh man, I was so excited. But then I started thinking every morning when I came into base, what if I went to the left? Because if I went to the left, that's where the people with desk jobs sit. That's the people that have real careers. That's the people who make even more money, and they make over six figures and they make all this money. What if I could go left? So every single day when I came on base, I kept on thinking to myself, one day I'm going to go left. One day I'm going to go left. And guess what I do? I go left now.
That's awesome. Now, did you have any inspiration or anyone besides your husband now? Anyone in your life or anything that inspired you to kind of see outside the box? There's always like in our life, whether it's a friend, like these mentors, we don't even realize they're mentoring us, but they kind of give us a little advice or they show us something different. Maybe they have a different lifestyle that inspires us. Did you have anything like that?
Honestly, I didn't. All of I had no friends really at all, and all my family were very, very toxic. And so my husband was the only person at the time that was even halfway normal and a good person. But what really helped me though is having a spiritual connection. So, having something bigger than me and higher than me. So whether it's God, universe, higher power, whatever you want to call it, that is what I really started trying to tap into and also into my own intuition. I started meditating, and I started really doing some deep work within myself. And I think that that's what's inspired me because I started learning that even if I don't have anybody in this world that I can count on, because my grandmother had passed, nobody else knew anything, like my family, no friends, all I had was my boyfriend at the time, but I needed something more and believing in something bigger than me. That's what really helped me proceed because I was like, wait a second, why am I cutting myself short? Like I can just keep on going. And if I'm blocked or stopped by any way, then that would be my sign that that's not the right path to go on. But I kept on walking and I kept on pushing myself a little bit further. Like, what can I manifest? What can I do with my life? Where is the wall? Where are the borders? And that's when I realized, I was putting those borders on myself. And I have this higher connection that I can tap into to help me feel safe, and help me feel supported along the way.
That's amazing that you're able to have that communication from within. Um, and I do find that people do have that voice,
Yes.
like you can change and they're able to change their path in some way. Now, I've also had inspiring people, and it may seem like very simple, where because well, I wasn't homeless, but my background was we were extremely poor. I mean, very poor. Um, like just going out to a restaurant and eat at a restaurant wasn't something my family ever did. Like we weren't worthy enough to go out to eat. So where I had a friend like, oh, let's go out to eat to this nice restaurant. And that felt awkward. So being in an environment that you're not used to, you need a little bit of adjustment, a little bit of an introduction, just like you going, okay, going to that daycare job and introducing yourself to the desk job, even though it's on the other side of the road, you're slowly introducing yourself to it and making it familiar. So I had these little experiences where, and looking back, that's what they felt very uncomfortable in the beginning because I'm like, I don't belong here.
Hmm.
I've never experienced. So I had to adjust myself, make that familiar, and tell myself
Yes.
it's okay to experience this.
Yes, because I actually found some old journals. I kept them, and like they say things about my wish list of what I wanted. I wanted socks that fit me, I wanted a hamper. And so I started like just working my way up. And then all of a suddenly I was like, I want to experience a fine dining restaurant and I want to have, white linen table, and I want to have that and I want to have this and I want to like be beautiful and I want to dress up. And then I just started checking off those boxes. And to fact, like when I walk by restaurants now that are very snazzy, jazzy. I'm like, oh, been there, done that. Don't you remember when I thought that was really cool? And then I was like, oh, wait, what if I traveled? So I traveled to New York and I thought that was amazing. But then I'm like, oh, but I've never been out of country before. Well, then me and my husband took, and by the way, my husband was broke too when I met him, by the way. Like people think like, oh, okay, you married into money. No, I didn't. He was broke. He made a little bit of money from, I forgot even what, going to school or something. And then I had his daycare job. We had nothing. We were living in a basement apartment when we got married, and we got married at the courthouse. We had nothing. Like my car was a 1997 Chevy Cavalier, and it was taped together. It was literally taped together. Now I'll be honest, like I drive a freaking Lexus. My husband has a Lexus. We have a beautiful house off of a lake. I have an island in my backyard. We went on almost a 3-week trip to the UK. And I don't say this to brag. I say this about the possibilities. But I love what you're saying. It's taking that first step and creating your new normal. It
Yeah.
was normal for me once upon a time to get evicted and to, be homeless. And then it became my own new normal just to have a little bit of security or to just shop here or to eat here, because now, like, I think the reason why that I eat out so much is because I was never able to eat out before. And it's like, and if I ate out, it was at the dollar menu or the cheapest thing. I remember the first time I ever ordered a steak at a restaurant because I didn't feel good enough. I didn't have the money, fill in the blank. And now it's like, oh, I could buy whatever I want on a menu, you know?
And you're not eating steak, you're picking something else.
Yes, exactly. Now I'm eating the freaking salad. I'm eating the one that's, the
Yeah.
cheapest on the menu. But it's so funny because people in my life that have known me all these years, like my siblings, my family and everything else, that they were like, wow, Heather, you had the roughest time, in your life period. And there's just watch you transform is amazing. And I'm like, yes, but I did it and you can do it too. Like that's the thing is like everybody can transform. Everybody can do this. And I think that the first thing that I did to help me out was believing in myself and taking one of those little baby steps, like you said, and having that be your new normal and then keep on working your way up until you are where you want to be to where now I'm like, what do I want now? I've published 2 books now. I've always wanted to be an author. I illustrated one of them. And so it's like, what else am I going to do? Where else do I want to go? What else
Possibilities
do I
are
want to experience?
endless.
Yes, exactly. Like, what do you want to experience, and start off small and see if that works and keep on going.
That's amazing. Now, from a spiritual perspective, we spoke a little bit about that inner voice. Like, when did you start noticing that inner voice that you say, hey, Heather, don't do this, or Heather, work on yourself? Like, do you have a recollection when you start noticing that inner voice within you that started guiding you in your life?
Yes. Do you remember when I told you that my grandmother died and I was going through a lot and I started having seizures out of nowhere? Well, I didn't tell anybody at the time, but when I started falling to the ground to start convulsing into my first ever seizure, I heard this voice inside of my mind and it screamed at me. It yelled, enough. And I remember I was so scared to tell anybody about that voice, but it stuck with me because I knew it was saying, it was like enough of this stressing, enough of this trying to just to get by, enough of this beating yourself up and, running away from problems or whatever it is, the whole cornucopia of everything that I was dealing with. And then that led me down a spiritual path to I started meditating with some monks nearby. Even in Metro Detroit, their monks are around. I was too scared to meditate. And so I didn't really know how and what. So I started meditating with the monks and they made me feel safe. And then that's what created and what allowed space between my thoughts so that I could actually start hearing my inner voice because it was so my at the time my mind was so full of a whole bunch of trauma and anxiety and because it was always going a mile a minute because I always had to be that way because I always had to defend myself. And so then once I started being able to meditate and I brought myself to a place where I felt safe, like in the monastery, then all of a sudden I was able to start relaxing. And that allowed me to hear my inner voice better.
And that has guided you, obviously, to where you are today. So tell us about your work, what you're doing today.
Oh, yes. Well, I don't know if you know this or not, but I'm a spiritual gifts mentor. So I actually help people open up to their spiritual gifts because I feel like a spiritual path, no matter what that means to you, it's basically a journey inwards to yourself to finding out who you are. And I really have felt that I found my community and my people are the ones that have the most trauma in their life, that have been beat up, the ones who have went through the ringer in life. Those people are the most spiritual people. Because I always say this, and I found it to be true, is that God, source, light, universe, they don't put light workers, people with a big inner light, he doesn't put those people with other light people. He puts them in the darkness. So
Mhm.
that's a reason why I was born into this darkness family, and all of this horrible things and stuff like that, because I'm the light. And so we need to find other light people, other people with that same light, people who've been through trauma like we have and things like that, because we are the people that have that big light. And our job, my belief is our job is just to keep on being that light, to share our love, to share our knowledge, to just do a little bit that we need to do in order to make our life better. So I find that, communicating with your intuition, your psychic, and even your mediumship abilities, that can really help you just live a life that's a little bit more stress free. You feel loved because you have this higher source connection. And so that's basically what I do. And I never thought that I had any of this, by the way. Like I didn't grow up this way. This kind of happened as a thing as I started meditating, and playing around with my life, basically.
Amazing. I do agree with you absolutely. I think we're here to break the cycles of that darkness within
Mhm.
these families, to shine that light and break those cycles so they don't continue on, as
And
we journey.
talk about full circle. The very first thing that I brought up to you is something that I don't really ever talk about. And that was when I was about 5 or 6 years old, where I would cry and I didn't want to live anymore. What I didn't realize at the time that I was doing, I was actually meditating and talking with my spirit guides. And I had no idea that I was doing it, or higher power, whatever you want to call it, because I was getting information back that I never told anybody. And the information was that you chose this family. And I was like, I did? I chose this family. They're like, yes, because you're meant to help them. Like, and they need you. So you need to stay around. And I remember for even years after that, remembering that message, being like, are you sure about this? And now I can see it, because even though my family, some of them don't agree with what I do, some of them don't believe in what I do, but that is totally fine. No one has to believe. That is not my job. My job is just to be the light. But I think it's really funny that they all come around and ask me questions, and they're all guided towards me. It's almost like we're the lighthouse, and they're always asking me questions, because then it makes them have a little bit of a better life, because, they know that there's something bigger going on than just their thoughts and that kind of thing. And you don't have to basically let life live you. You could live your life and you can make it better.
Absolutely. And you don't have to make anybody do anything. That it's really up to them. It's their choice to find
Mhm.
their own path, but they can look up to you and find guidance to what you're doing. Just like you said, we're here to shine the light, to be the
Yep.
example of what they can possibly become.
Yes.
And, I've seen that in my own life. I've seen it in so many people's life. And, it's just amazing in itself. It's so courageous um, to even go through this journey, because it's not an easy journey. It's very painful. There's a lot of obstacles. It's not like you go on hiatus. Once you accomplish the hurdles and you're on the beach drinking margaritas all the
Yes.
time.
I always say that. I always say that is that my dream day, sitting on a beach drinking margaritas, so I absolutely love that.
But thank you so much, Heather, for sharing this story with us. Now, where can people reach out to you if they wanted to get in contact?
Oh, well, they can definitely check me out. I'm at the real REAL HeatherDanielle.com, or you can just go ahead and find me on maybe Instagram, spiritual AF Heather Danielle. So
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Please share, like, and subscribe so I can get more stories like this over to you. Until next time.